So just catch me up on your life. I knew you at UCLA. We're in a Japanese class in the fall of 1988, and we've hardly talked since. So just catch me up a little bit on what you've been doing.
Well, I mean, again, for record, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Arnold Strong, and since we were classmates together at UCLA in the English department, and I was in the English department, and we met together in the Japanese department, which I realized was a difficult challenge trying to read Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Nihongo. I graduated UCLA that summer in 1990. During which time I was also a lieutenant in the California National Guard. Came onto active duty in the summer of 1990, went to airborne school, went to Ranger school, and then departed. I was mobilized for service for the Gulf War, and so thinking that I was going to the Gulf, my wife and I, then my girlfriend, got married 20 years ago this month. Thinking that I was going to be deployed to the Gulf. And then when I didn't end up going, my unit was reassigned. I was able to have a wedding in Los Angeles in March of 1991. And then really the next week we moved to Berlin, and we were in Berlin for 3.5 years and transitioned that back to the Germans, came back to Georgia for a year, did some more training, and then I was assigned to Hawaii, where I did my company command in the 25th Division. I also spent part of that time in the Sinai, brokering, sort of doing the tactical execution of the peace accord brokered by Carter between Begin and Sadat along the Sinai Peninsula. And then I was assigned as a public affairs officer up in Fort Lewis, Washington, and got out of the Army in the beginning of 2000, started off as a bearded .com PR guy, and did that for a couple of years until September 11th. Was sort of confused about why I was out of the Army, and I got back in initially with the National Guard of Oregon as the public affairs officer for the state. So I suddenly became like the media relations guy for the state of Oregon, and did that for several years, during which time I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and Hurricane Katrina in between. And then I transitioned to the Army Reserve to make Lieutenant Colonel in the fall of '08, and I've been doing that for a couple of years and juggling graduate school and a couple entrepreneurial endeavors and this for the last 2 years. So there's 20 years for you.
Now, you grew up in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles. Every time I fly out of LAX, I look down off the right side of the wing, north side of the freeway, and there's my high school. Flying into LA, I fly over the house I grew up in. So I grew up right there, just in the Westchester area, right around Los Angeles.
So how did you join the National Guard?
Well, I mean, I was a surfer, I was the singer of a band, I was a model, I was sort of everything Los Angeles, and didn't really know where I was going at 17, and had an application from New Mexico Military Institute, a military junior college in Roswell, New Mexico, and got accepted there and had a great sponsoring recruiting officer who later was my commissioning officer, and I went to New Mexico for 2 years and got my commission as a second lieutenant. During those 2 years, I was also enlisted in the New Mexico National Guard, and really sort of turned my life around and gave me sort of a focus on something other than me. And that's really what I guess service has been about for me for 25 years.
How did you decide after college to devote your working life to the armed forces?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because I got a lot of value out of my experience as a young late teen guy who was in the ROTC and in the National Guard, and I was surrounded by a bunch of veterans that were, Vietnam-era veterans that really showed me the importance of making a difference and making a difference in your world, and that was before I met you. And then while I was there at UCLA, I was also balancing that against being a lieutenant in the National Guard, and I drew some value out of it. I never for the life of me, thought that I was going to still be in the Army at 43. But, every assignment I've had has given me another compelling reason to stay in. And it tends to be about, something that I've been able to do to help a soldier or service member with a circumstance in their life. And I've always been that that kind of leader who's spoken up on behalf of others. And now I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army, so my philosophy is, what are they going to do? Make me a soldier?
Now, the armed forces gain is rock and roll's loss. Do you have any thoughts on what could have been?
Well, when I started my career, when I first enlisted in the Army at 17, it was right around the time that MTV was starting, and my fellow UCLA graduate and old friend Louis Chudasoke, who's now a professor of literature at University of Washington, he and I were approached for doing a video because we were this whole ebony ivory look, this African and blonde hair, blue eyed, thin white Duke, and had a couple songs on local college radio. And I spent all of basic watching MTV in the day room, thinking, why, oh why did I shave my head bald and do this? But I've stayed with music. I'm a conga player. I was a conga player in a funk band in Berlin in the early '90s, and I've always had a music room. I've always had an affinity for it. My two sons each play classical instrument, violin and cello, and they also play drums and guitar, and so I try to keep up with music.
How long did you spend in the Sinai?
I was there for 6 months, and so that's a rotational assignment that's been around since the 1979, I think the mission started, and I was there in 1996, where I did my company command, and it's basically the implementation of the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, and basically just keeping checks and balances in place so that they don't impede on each other's airspace or ground space. And there's not been a major incident, cross-border action there for 30 plus years.
Were you just stuck there in the desert for 6 months? I mean, it really sounds pretty grim.
It was not grim at all, I will tell you. I was down. Some of the assignments are very remote. The remote sites are very remote, and I, being the headquarters commander, was down just outside of Sharm el Sheikh, which is now an international resort. Of course, they've just done a couple Middle East peace conferences there. When I was there, it was a little bit smaller than it is now, but it's beautiful. It's the Red Sea. You've got world-class diving, world-class snorkeling. You've got all sorts of Europeans on holiday. It's very much a pleasant place to spend 6 months looking through binoculars.
Tell me about how you found out on 9/11 that America was under attack. What time did you find out, and what were you doing, and what were you thinking?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting story, Luke. I was out of the Army at the time. I was working for Sprint, the telecommunications company, and for years I lived without 15 years I lived without a television. I just didn't think it was something I needed in my life, and neither did my wife. And my friend called me as we were packing up to work, and he said, "Arnold, turn on your TV." I said, "I don't have a TV." He says, "You've got to get in front of a television. America's under attack." And I went over to my friend's house a couple blocks away, pounded on our door until she opened up, and her two kids, I said, "Caprice, we got to turn on the news," and turned on the news. And right then is when the second plane went into the second building, and that sort of